Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching from and what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoy hearing this story. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's drift into a peaceful slumber together. This time I will tell you about Theseus, Minotaur, and destiny. Let's get started. Theseus had always known he was different. Born as the son of Aegeus, the mighty king of Athens, and Aethra, a noblewoman from Troezen, he had grown up listening to stories of great heroes, demigods, and warriors who shaped the world with their strength and wisdom. From the moment he could walk, Theseus was drawn to adventure, to tales of valor and sacrifice. But little did he know that fate had already woven a grand tapestry for him, one that would lead him to face a terrifying monster lurking deep within the labyrinth of Crete. As a child, Theseus was raised in Troezen under the watchful eyes of his grandfather, King Theseus. Aegeus, his father, had left him a challenge. Beneath a massive rock, he had hidden a sword and a pair of sandals. Aegeus had told Aethra that when Theseus was strong enough to lift the rock and claim these items, he would be ready to journey to Athens and claim his place as the rightful heir to the throne. Years passed, and Theseus grew into a strong and intelligent young man. He trained tirelessly in combat, mastering the art of swordplay, wrestling, and strategy. But more than that, he was curious, always seeking knowledge about the world and the gods who ruled over it. He listened carefully to the wisdom of the elders, learning about justice, leadership, and the responsibilities of a true king. One fateful day, when he was of age, Theseus approached the sacred rock. With a deep breath, he placed his hands upon its rough surface, feeling the weight of his destiny pressing down upon him. Summoning all his strength, he heaved the rock aside, revealing the gleaming sword and sandals beneath. His heart pounded in his chest as he grasped them, knowing that his journey was about to begin. With these symbols of his birthright in hand, he set forth on the perilous road to Athens, determined to prove himself to his father. The journey was treacherous. Unlike most who traveled by sea, Theseus chose the dangerous land route, seeking to rid the path of the bandits and monsters that plagued innocent travelers. He encountered and defeated 6 formidable foes along the way: Periphetes, the club-wielding brute, Cenes, the pine-bender, the monstrous Salphia, Siron, who fed his victims to a giant turtle, Circean, the wrestling king, and Procrustes, the cruel innkeeper who stretched or cut his guests to fit his bed. Each battle tested his wit and strength, forging him into a warrior worthy of legend. By the time he reached Athens, word of his deeds had already spread far and wide. The people whispered his name in awe, wondering if this young hero could truly be the son of their king. However, not all welcomed his arrival. Medea, a sorceress who had taken refuge in Athens and gained Aegeus' trust, saw Theseus as a threat to her power. She devised a plot to poison him before he could reveal his identity. During a grand feast, Theseus was served a goblet of poisoned wine. But just as he was about to drink, he drew his father's sword, a gesture that caught Aegeus' attention. Recognizing the blade, Aegeus realized the truth: this was his long-lost son. Overcome with emotion, he knocked the goblet from Theseus' hands and embraced him, rejoicing in their reunion. Medea, seeing her plans foiled, fled from Athens in disgrace. Theseus quickly became a beloved figure among the Athenians. He displayed not only strength but also wisdom, ensuring justice and fairness in all matters. But just as he began to settle into his new life, a dark cloud loomed over Athens, one that threatened the very soul of the city. Every 9 years, as punishment for an old war between Crete and Athens, King Minos of Crete demanded a terrible tribute. 7 young men and 7 young women from Athens were to be sent to Crete as sacrifices for the Minotaur, a monstrous creature imprisoned within the labyrinth. The Minotaur was a beast of nightmares, half man, half bull, born from a curse placed upon Minos' wife by the gods. It dwelled deep within an intricate maze designed by the master craftsman Daedalus, a structure so complex that none who entered ever found their way out again. The citizens of Athens lived in perpetual sorrow, knowing that every cycle they would lose their sons and daughters to this horror. When the time came for the third tribute, a heavy silence fell over the city. The chosen youths wept, their families mourned, and all of Athens shuddered under the weight of their helplessness. But Theseus could not stand by and watch his people suffer. He had fought monsters before, faced the wrath of criminals and beasts alike. Surely he could face this Minotaur and end the cycle of fear. With unwavering resolve, Theseus stepped forward. "I will go to Crete," he declared. "I will enter the labyrinth and slay the Minotaur. This tribute will be the last." Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. Aegeus, stricken with fear for his son's life, tried to dissuade him. "This is not a foe like any other," he warned. "The labyrinth is a prison of madness, and the Minotaur is a horror beyond reckoning." But Theseus was resolute. "If we do nothing, the suffering will continue forever," he said. "I must try. I must fight." Seeing the determination in his son's eyes, Aegeus reluctantly gave his blessing. But before Theseus departed, he made him promise one thing: "When you return, if you are victorious, change the black sail of your ship to white. Let it be a sign to me that you are safe. If the sails remain black, I will know that you have perished." With a heavy heart, Theseus agreed. And so, he boarded the ship alongside the chosen tributes, setting sail for Crete. The people of Athens watched in silence as their prince departed, their only hope resting upon his shoulders. As the ship sailed across the vast, open sea, Theseus stood at the bow, gazing ahead with unwavering focus. He knew that great trials awaited him, that the labyrinth would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. But he did not falter. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would do so again. He was Theseus, son of Aegeus, and his destiny was calling him toward the heart of the labyrinth, toward the battle that would define him for all time. The ship glided across the vast expanse of the Aegean Sea, its black sails billowing under the wind's steady breath. The sky above was a brilliant blue, unmarred by clouds, but for the young Athenians aboard the vessel, there was no joy in the journey. Each of them knew their fate. They were not travelers but sacrifices, bound for Crete to meet a terrible end within the winding passages of the labyrinth. Their voices were hushed, their expressions hollow, their shoulders heavy with resignation. Yet, amidst them stood Theseus, the prince of Athens, his back straight, his eyes sharp, and his heart resolute. He was different from the others, not merely in status but in spirit. While the rest of the tributes sat in quiet despair, he moved among them, offering words of encouragement, clasping their shoulders, meeting their eyes with unwavering confidence. He had vowed to end the cycle of suffering, and he intended to keep that vow. The journey to Crete was not a short one. The ship rocked gently with the rhythm of the waves as the oarsmen propelled it forward, their muscles straining under the weight of their task. Theseus spent his time preparing. He trained with his sword on the deck, striking at the empty air, imagining the fearsome beast that awaited him. The Minotaur was no ordinary foe, half man, half bull, a creature of brute strength and relentless fury. Theseus knew he would need more than physical power to best it. He would need strategy, cunning, and perhaps even divine intervention. The ship's captain, an older man with a weathered face, approached Theseus one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sea in hues of gold and crimson. "You are brave, my prince," he said, his voice carrying a note of sorrow. "But do you truly believe you can defeat the beast?" Theseus met the man's gaze, his expression unwavering. "I do not believe, old friend." "I know." The captain sighed and patted Theseus on the shoulder before walking away. He had seen many tributes leave for Crete, but none had returned. The young prince's determination was admirable, but the labyrinth was no ordinary prison. It was a masterpiece of deception, a place where even the bravest warriors lost themselves before the Minotaur found them. As the days passed, Theseus observed his fellow tributes closely. Some clung to their faith, whispering prayers to Athena, to Poseidon, to Zeus. Others kept to themselves, their gazes fixed on the endless horizon. One of the young men, a boy named Damon, barely older than a child, trembled constantly. Theseus sat beside him one night as the moon cast silver light upon the deck. "You are afraid," Theseus said gently. Damon nodded, his hands clenched into fists. "I do not want to die." Theseus placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me. Fear is natural, but do not let it claim you. I will fight for all of us. I will defeat the Minotaur and lead us home." Damon looked at him, hope flickering in his wide eyes. It was a fragile thing, but in the face of despair, even the smallest ember of hope was precious. At last, on the 6th day, Crete appeared on the horizon. The island loomed before them, its cliffs rising like jagged teeth against the sky. At its heart stood the great palace of Knossos, an architectural marvel of gleaming marble and gold, sprawling across the landscape like the den of a god. The ship drew closer, and the young Athenians gathered at the rails, their fear tightening its grip upon them once more. On the docks, King Minos waited, his presence as imposing as the stories claimed. He was a man of great stature, his beard streaked with silver, his eyes dark and unreadable. At his side stood his daughter, Ariadne. She was clad in flowing robes of deep red, her golden hair cascading over her shoulders. But it was her eyes that held Theseus' attention. They were sharp, intelligent, curious. She watched him with an intensity that set her apart from the rest. As the tributes disembarked, Minos stepped forward. "Welcome to Crete," he said, his voice rich with authority. "You will be given food and rest before your journey into the labyrinth. Spend your last days well." The cruelty of his words was softened only by Ariadne's lingering gaze. Theseus met her eyes, and in that instant, something passed between them, an understanding, a question, perhaps even a promise. The tributes were led through the grand corridors of Knossos, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. They were taken to a vast chamber, where food had been laid out for them. It was an odd thing, to be feasted before being sent to die. The younger ones ate with hesitation, while others refused entirely, their stomachs too twisted with dread. Theseus, however, ate heartily. he would need his strength. That night, as the others lay on their pallets in uneasy sleep, Theseus remained awake, staring at the ceiling. He could hear the distant sounds of Crete, the laughter of revelers, the whispers of servants, the call of the wind through the open windows. But beneath it all, he imagined the labyrinth. He could almost hear its silence, the breath of the beast that awaited him. And then he heard something else. Soft footsteps approaching. He turned just as Ariadne slipped into the chamber. She moved with the grace of a panther, silent and sure. She gestured for him to follow, and he did. In a quiet corridor away from prying eyes, she spoke. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice low. "You do not cower. You do not despair." "Theseus of Athens does not fear death," he replied. Ariadne studied him for a moment before stepping closer. "But do you wish to live?" He frowned. "I wish to win." A small smile touched her lips. "Then listen carefully." And so, beneath the moonlight, she began to tell him of the labyrinth, of its secrets, and of the one thing that might save him from its grasp. Theseus stood in the dimly lit corridor of the Cretan palace, his heart steady as Ariadne's words settled into his mind. The young princess, a woman of sharp intellect and quiet strength, had come to him not out of duty but out of something else, curiosity, admiration, perhaps even the first stirrings of love. "You cannot fight the labyrinth," she whispered, her gaze locked onto his. "It is not merely a place, it is a prison of the mind. Men have entered with weapons, with torches, with maps sketched from memory, and still they have never returned." Theseus listened in silence. He had heard the stories before of warriors who had braved the maze, believing their strength would guide them, only to find themselves lost in endless corridors, their cries swallowed by the cold, merciless stone. The Minotaur did not need to hunt them, the labyrinth itself was the true predator. Ariadne took a deep breath and stepped closer, lowering her voice further. "But I can help you." "How?" Theseus asked. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, but then she made her decision. From the folds of her robe, she pulled out a small bundle wrapped in fine cloth. Slowly, she unraveled it to reveal a simple ball of thread. Theseus raised an eyebrow. "You would have me fight the Minotaur with thread?" Ariadne let out a quiet laugh. "No. But if you are to find your way back, you will need it." She explained the plan. Before he entered the labyrinth, he would tie the thread to the entrance and unwind it as he ventured deeper. If the gods were kind and he survived his battle, he could follow the thread back to freedom. It was not a weapon, but it was the only thing that had ever given a man a chance of escape. Theseus reached out, taking the thread from her hands. It was light, almost insignificant, but he knew its true value. He had always relied on strength, on skill, on instinct, but here, intelligence would be his greatest weapon. He met Ariadne's gaze once more. "Why are you helping me?" Her expression was unreadable, but after a moment, she said, "Because I do not wish to see you die." The answer was simple, yet heavy with meaning. Theseus gave a small nod. He could not promise survival, but he could promise to fight. The following morning, the city of Knossos was alive with tension. The tributes were led from the palace, their wrists bound with ceremonial cords. The people of Crete lined the streets, some jeering, some pitying, but all watching. They had seen this spectacle before. It was tradition, a grim display that repeated itself every 9 years. At the forefront stood King Minos, his expression unyielding. He had ruled for decades, and the labyrinth had long been a reminder of his power. To him, these sacrifices were justice for a war long past, a message to Athens that Crete still held dominion over its fate. Theseus walked at the head of the line, his face calm, his steps measured. He showed no fear, no hesitation, and the people murmured at his boldness. They did not know that hidden within his tunic was Ariadne's thread, nor did they know that he carried the weight of an entire city's hopes upon his shoulders. The entrance to the labyrinth loomed before them. It was an ancient structure, built into the side of a rocky hill, its gateway carved with the symbols of Daedalus, the master craftsman who had designed it. Beyond the entrance, there was only darkness, a cold, yawning mouth that had swallowed countless souls. The tributes were released from their bonds. One by one, they were forced inside. Some hesitated, some wept, but none could resist. When Theseus stepped forward, he felt Ariadne's eyes on him from the palace balcony above. He did not look back. He could not afford to. As he entered the labyrinth, the air changed. The stone walls seemed to close around him, the flickering torches barely illuminating the twisting corridors ahead. The silence was profound, as if the world itself had ceased to exist beyond these walls. With steady hands, he tied the end of the thread to a rough stone near the entrance and let the ball rest in his palm. Then, without a word, he moved forward, deeper into the heart of the labyrinth, where the Minotaur waited. As Theseus stepped deeper into the labyrinth, the cold air wrapped around him like a living thing. The torches near the entrance barely reached the first turn, and soon the walls swallowed all light, leaving him in near darkness. The stone beneath his feet was uneven, worn down by the countless doomed souls who had walked this path before him. The ball of thread rested in his palm, a lifeline in an abyss of uncertainty. With careful hands, he unwound it as he moved forward, tying it to rough stones and iron rings embedded in the walls whenever he reached a bend. It was a simple thing, barely heavier than a handful of wool, yet he knew that without it, he would be just another nameless victim lost within the maze. Every step was deliberate. He knew the labyrinth was no ordinary prison. It was built by Daedalus, the greatest craftsman of his time, designed not just to trap, but to confuse. Corridors twisted back on themselves, passageways led to dead ends, and hidden shafts opened into chasms deep enough to swallow a man whole. The walls themselves seemed to whisper, as if the ghosts of past victims lingered in the air, warning him, pleading with him to turn back. But Theseus pressed on. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft scuff of his sandals against the stone and the occasional distant drip of water. He knew he was not alone. Somewhere in the darkness, the Minotaur waited. He had heard tales of the beast since childhood, a creature born of both man and bull, a grotesque mockery of nature, imprisoned in this maze to protect the world from its wrath. Some said it was mindless, driven only by hunger and rage. Others claimed it had the cunning of a man, that it stalked its prey like a hunter in the night. A sudden sound broke the silence, a low, guttural exhale, the sound of something breathing in the depths of the labyrinth. Theseus froze. His grip tightened around the thread, his other hand hovering over the hilt of his sword. He turned his head slightly, listening, straining to make out any movement beyond the suffocating dark. The breath came again, slow and deep, followed by the scrape of something heavy dragging across stone. It was close. Theseus took a careful step forward, his heart pounding but his mind clear. He had not come this far to falter now. The corridors twisted again, the air growing heavier, thick with the scent of damp stone and something else, something foul, like old blood and rotting flesh. He knew, without a doubt, that he was nearing the beast's lair. A distant growl rumbled through the tunnels, low and menacing. The sound sent a shiver down his spine, but he did not slow his pace. He could not afford hesitation. Then, as he rounded the next corner, the air shifted. The space ahead opened into a vast chamber, larger than anything he had encountered so far. Even in the darkness, he could sense its enormity, the ceiling high above, the walls stretching wide. This was it, the heart of the labyrinth. And within it, something moved. A massive shape, barely visible in the gloom, rose from the shadows. It stood on two legs, its broad, muscular form shifting with slow, deliberate movements. Its head was unmistakable, a great, horned skull of a bull, its nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. The Minotaur had found him. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with a roar that shook the very walls of the labyrinth, the beast charged. The Minotaur's roar thundered through the labyrinth, shaking the very stones around Theseus. Dust and loose gravel trembled beneath his feet as the beast charged, its massive hooves pounding against the ground like a war drum. The sheer force of its movement sent a gust of air rushing through the chamber, carrying the foul stench of blood and decay. But Theseus did not run. He had prepared for this moment, replayed it in his mind ever since he set foot on Crete. He knew he could not rely on brute strength alone. The Minotaur was a creature of raw power, far stronger than any man. If Theseus fought it head-on, he would be crushed within moments. Instead, he waited until the last possible second. As the beast lunged, its long, curved horns aiming for his chest, Theseus twisted his body to the side. The force of the Minotaur's charge nearly pulled him into its wake, but he dropped low, rolling along the ground and coming up swiftly with his sword drawn. The beast skidded to a halt, its hooves scraping against the stone as it turned to face him again. For the first time, Theseus saw the creature in its entirety. It was taller than any man, its body a monstrous fusion of human and bull. Thick muscles rippled beneath coarse fur, and its hands, if they could be called that, were tipped with black, jagged claws. But its eyes were the most terrifying of all. They burned in the darkness, filled not just with rage, but with a deep, consuming agony. Theseus knew then that this creature had suffered. It had been born from a curse, a punishment beyond its understanding, forced to live in darkness, alone, with only the taste of flesh to sustain it. But there was no time for pity. The Minotaur charged again, faster this time. Theseus barely dodged, feeling the heat of the beast's breath as it passed. He swung his sword, but the Minotaur was quicker than he expected. A powerful arm lashed out, and Theseus was sent sprawling across the chamber, his back colliding with the rough stone wall. Pain flared through his body, but he forced himself up. He could not afford to stay down. The Minotaur was already turning, its heavy hooves clattering against the stone as it ready for another charge. Theseus gritted his teeth. He needed a plan. His mind raced. The beast was fast, but it relied on its momentum. If he could use that against it. He tightened his grip on his sword, positioning himself near one of the larger stone pillars that lined the chamber. He had seen these before in the palace, massive supports carved from the same rock as the labyrinth. They were ancient, heavy, and most importantly, unmovable. The Minotaur bellowed and lunged again. This time, Theseus didn't dodge to the side. Instead, he ran straight toward the beast. The Minotaur, surprised by the sudden move, did not slow its charge. At the last moment, Theseus dropped low and rolled beneath the creature, narrowly avoiding its deadly horns. The Minotaur, unable to stop its own momentum, slammed headfirst into the pillar. The impact was deafening. The entire chamber seemed to shake as dust rained down from the ceiling. The beast let out a pained roar, staggering back. Blood dripped from its forehead, staining its coarse fur. It shook its head, dazed, but still standing. Theseus did not hesitate. He saw his opening. With a burst of speed, he lunged forward, his sword flashing in the dim torchlight. He drove the blade deep into the Minotaur's side, piercing flesh and muscle. The beast let out a terrible, earth-shaking cry, its massive hands clawing at the wound. But it did not fall. Instead, it turned, swinging wildly. One of its powerful arms connected with Theseus, sending him crashing into the ground. His sword was wrenched from his grasp, still buried in the Minotaur's side. Gasping, Theseus scrambled backward, trying to regain his footing. The Minotaur was bleeding heavily now, its breathing ragged, but it was still alive. It stumbled toward him, its hooves dragging, but its eyes burned with rage. Theseus searched frantically for another weapon. His sword was out of reach. His knife was gone. He had only seconds before the beast reached him. Then, his fingers brushed against something thin and familiar. The thread. An idea struck him like lightning. As the Minotaur lunged, Theseus grabbed a long length of the thread and, with a swift movement, looped it around the beast's massive throat. Using all his strength, he pulled tight. The Minotaur roared, thrashing wildly, but Theseus held on, twisting the thread tighter and tighter. The beast's movements became sluggish, its massive body shaking as it fought for breath. Its hooves scraped against the stone, its claws raking the air. And then, with one last desperate heave, the Minotaur collapsed. The great beast shuddered once, then lay still. Breathing heavily, Theseus stepped back, his hands trembling. The air was thick with dust and the coppery scent of blood. The labyrinth, which had once echoed with the sounds of the hunt, now stood silent. The Minotaur, the terror of Crete, was dead. But Theseus could not rest yet. He still had to find his way out. And he knew that the hardest part of his journey was yet to come. For a long moment, Theseus stood in the eerie silence of the labyrinth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The Minotaur's massive body lay sprawled before him, motionless, its thick, bloodied fur barely stirring in the cold underground air. It was over. The beast was dead. But the battle had drained him, and the realization that he was still deep within the labyrinth began to sink in. He could not afford to rest. Steadying himself, he turned his gaze toward the thin, silken thread that still trailed from his hand, leading back into the darkness. Ariadne's gift had guided him here, and now it would guide him home. Taking a deep breath, Theseus began retracing his steps, carefully following the path he had woven through the twisting corridors. The echoes of his own footsteps filled the tunnels, magnified by the endless stone walls. The weight of exhaustion pressed against him, but he forced himself onward. Every step away from the chamber of the Minotaur was a step toward freedom. As he moved through the labyrinth, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to shift. Before, the walls had felt alive, shifting, trapping him in a maze with no end. Now, with the Minotaur slain, the dread that had clung to the air seemed to weaken. Perhaps it had been more than just a beast. Perhaps its presence had been intertwined with the labyrinth itself, its anger and hunger infecting the very stones. But even without the Minotaur, the labyrinth was still a deadly place. Several times, Theseus passed dark passageways that seemed unfamiliar. The walls, rough and ancient, loomed over him, casting long, flickering shadows in the dim torchlight. At one point, he reached a fork in the path where his thread looped awkwardly around a jagged rock. He hesitated. Had he tied it correctly? Or had it slipped, leading him astray? He gritted his teeth and trusted the thread. It was his only hope. As he moved forward, the air grew damp, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnels. He remembered hearing similar sounds on his way in, but were they the same drips or different ones? The labyrinth had a way of making one doubt everything. His thoughts drifted to Ariadne. Had she remained at the palace? Was she watching from her balcony, waiting for a sign of his success or failure? He had promised nothing, and yet she had placed her trust in him. The memory of her determined face pushed him forward. The deeper he traveled, the more the weight of the labyrinth pressed upon him. Time lost meaning within its walls. How long had he been inside? Hours? A full day? His muscles ached, and his body screamed for rest, but stopping was not an option. He had to reach the others. Then, suddenly, a sound broke through the silence. A rustling. Theseus froze. His fingers tightened around the thread as his heart pounded. Had something else survived in the labyrinth? Another beast, another horror that Minos had imprisoned within these cursed walls? He strained his ears, waiting. Silence. Then, another rustling. Closer. He gripped the handle of his dagger, the only weapon left to him. His sword was still buried in the Minotaur's corpse, unreachable now. The sound came again, and this time he heard something else, a voice. Theseus? Relief flooded him as he recognized the voice of one of the Athenian tributes. He turned a corner and saw them, his fellow captives, huddled together in fear, their faces pale, their clothes tattered from their time in the darkness. They had been left to wander, waiting to be hunted by the Minotaur, with no hope of escape. "You're alive," a young woman gasped, her eyes wide. "The Minotaur is dead," Theseus said firmly. "We're leaving." A few of them stared at him in disbelief. One of the older men, who had accepted his fate before entering the labyrinth, fell to his knees in shock. You killed it?" "These walls will not take us," Theseus assured them. "Follow me. Do not stray." He held up the thread, showing them their path to freedom, and then, without waiting for hesitation to settle in, he led them forward. The journey back was slower. Some of the tributes were weak from exhaustion and fear, their spirits battered by the horrors of the labyrinth. Theseus supported them as best he could, guiding them step by step. The air remained heavy, but the further they moved, the more the labyrinth seemed to lose its grip on them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tunnel ahead brightened. Light. The entrance. With a final push, Theseus emerged into the open air, his lungs filling with the clean, salty breeze of Crete. The tributes followed behind him, their eyes blinking against the sudden brightness of the world outside. Some of them collapsed in the grass, overwhelmed by their survival. Above them, on the balcony of the palace, a figure stood waiting. Ariadne. Their eyes met, and for the first time since entering the labyrinth, Theseus allowed himself to feel something other than determination. He had survived. They had survived. But the night was not yet over. He had escaped the labyrinth. Now, he had to escape Crete. The night air was crisp and cool as Theseus and the rescued Athenian tributes emerged from the dark mouth of the labyrinth. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, as if the gods themselves had been watching his battle and were now guiding his way. But there was no time to admire the heavens. King Minos would soon learn of the Minotaur's death, and when he did, the palace would become a cage. Ariadne was already waiting for him. She stood at the edge of the palace grounds, her face half hidden by the flickering torchlight. Relief flooded her eyes when she saw him, but she did not move forward. She could not risk being seen. Theseus crossed the distance between them in quick, quiet steps. "You did it," she whispered. "The Minotaur is dead," he confirmed. "But Minos will be searching for us soon. We need to leave now." Ariadne nodded and handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Food, water, and a dagger. And this. She pressed a bronze seal into his palm, her father's royal insignia. "It will get you past the guards at the docks." Theseus looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time since they had met. She had risked everything for him, a stranger, an enemy to her people. Yet here she stood, willing to betray her father, her home, for the chance of something different. "You have to come with us," he said. Ariadne hesitated, glancing back at the palace. In the distance, the high towers of Knossos loomed, their golden spires reflecting the moonlight. This was the only home she had ever known. But what was it to her now? A prison? A place of cruelty, ruled by a father who saw her as nothing more than a pawn? She met Theseus's gaze. "Take me with you." There was no more time to waste. With swift, careful movements, they led the Athenian tributes down a hidden path away from the palace grounds. Ariadne had studied the guard shifts, and she knew when they would be weakest. Even so, every shadow felt like a watchful eye, every distant voice a warning. At last, the harbor came into view. Dozens of ships lined the wooden docks, their sails furled, their crews either asleep or drinking away the late hours. The sea stretched out beyond them, dark and endless, promising freedom. But freedom was not yet within reach. At the far end of the docks, Cretan guards stood watch, spears in hand. A line of torches illuminated their forms, casting long shadows on the wooden planks. There was no slipping past them unnoticed. Theseus turned to Ariadne. "The seal, will it work?" She took a deep breath and nodded. "If they believe you are under my father's orders, they won't question you." But even as she said the words, doubt flickered in her eyes. If the guards had already been alerted about the labyrinth, if Minos had realized his daughter was missing, their plan would fall apart in an instant. There was no choice but to try. Theseus squared his shoulders and approached the guards with Ariadne at his side, the Athenian tributes following closely behind. The nearest guard stepped forward. "Halt. No one leaves the harbor at this hour without the king's orders." Theseus held up the bronze seal. Orders from the king. The guard hesitated, his eyes flicking to Ariadne. Lady Ariadne? She stepped forward, her voice calm, commanding. These men are being sent away under my father's wishes. There is no need for delay. The guard exchanged looks with his companions. Something felt off. Theseus could see it in the way they shifted, the way their grips tightened on their weapons. Ariadne was respected, but she was not feared. These men were loyal to Minos, not her. Then, from the distance, a horn blew. A warning. Shouts erupted from the palace. Light flared as torches were lit. The alarm had been raised. The guards at the dock tensed, their suspicion turning to certainty. Seize them. There was no time for words. Theseus acted first, driving his fist into the nearest guard's face, sending him sprawling. The dock erupted into chaos. The Athenian tributes, though weak from imprisonment, fought desperately, using whatever they could: fists, ropes, even broken pieces of wood. Ariadne grabbed a dagger from her belt and slashed at the leather bindings of a nearby ship, letting the sail fall loose. Theseus, get everyone on board. The fight was frantic, but Theseus had one advantage: the guards had not expected them to resist. He knocked another soldier aside, then grabbed the nearest tribute by the arm, pushing him toward the ship. Go! Move! One by one, the Athenians scrambled onto the deck, while others untied the ropes securing the vessel to the dock. A spear whistled past Theseus's head, barely missing him. He turned to see another guard charging at him, sword raised. Before the strike could land, Theseus ducked and drove his shoulder into the man's gut, sending him toppling into the dark waters below. More guards were coming. Ariadne, he shouted. She was still at the edge of the dock, her chest rising and falling with panic. Behind her, torches flickered as Minos's soldiers closed in. Theseus, go, she cried. No. He ran to her, grabbing her hand just as the first of Minos's warriors reached the dock. The ship had already begun to drift. The tributes had cut the last of the ropes, and the tide was pulling them away. If they didn't jump now, they would never make it. With one last desperate breath, Theseus pulled Ariadne with him, and together they leapt. For a moment, there was only the shock of cold water, the weight of the sea swallowing them whole. Then, hands reached down, pulling them aboard. They had made it. As the ship sailed into the night, Crete shrinking behind them, Theseus turned to see the shore ablaze with torches. Soldiers ran along the docks, shouting, but they were too late. Ariadne lay beside him, drenched, breathing hard. She looked at him and, despite everything, smiled. They were free. But their journey was far from over. The ship cut through the dark waters, the salty wind whipping against Theseus's face. Crete had faded into the horizon, its torches and palace walls swallowed by the vast night. The Athenian tributes huddled together on the deck, their bodies exhausted but their spirits soaring. They were free. No more labyrinth. No more Minotaur. No more sacrifices. Theseus let out a slow breath, the weight of their escape settling over him. The battle was over, but a strange unease lingered in his heart. He turned to Ariadne, who sat beside him, wringing seawater from the folds of her dress. You did not have to come, he said softly. She looked at him, her dark eyes unreadable. Where else would I go? It was true. By helping him, she had burned her last bridge to Crete. There was no home for her there now. Perhaps, he thought, she had never truly had one. For a while, they sailed in silence, the rhythmic creaking of the ship filling the empty night. But something gnawed at Theseus's mind, a promise unspoken, a fate yet to be fulfilled. He was bringing Ariadne to Athens, but what then? Would she rule at his side? Would his people accept her? As the sky paled with the coming dawn, they spotted land. The island of Naxos. The sailors knew it well, a safe harbor before the long journey home. They anchored near the shore, and the tributes, eager to stretch their legs, made their way onto the soft sand. Theseus and Ariadne followed, their feet sinking into the warm earth. She smiled, gazing at the island's lush hills. It's beautiful. He nodded, but the unease in his chest tightened. He knew what had to be done. As the others explored, Theseus led Ariadne deeper into the island, away from the shoreline. They walked for a time, neither speaking, until finally he stopped. Ariadne, he said, his voice heavy. She turned to him, sensing the shift in his tone. What is it? His throat tightened. He had faced the Minotaur, escaped the labyrinth, defied a king, but this moment felt heavier than all of it. I cannot take you to Athens. The words hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. She stared at him, confusion flickering into hurt. What? Theseus, she stepped forward, reaching for him, but he did not move. I gave up everything for you. And he knew that. He had seen the fire in her eyes when she had placed the thread in his hands, the unwavering trust as she helped him escape her father's grasp. She had fought for him, chosen him, but she was still the daughter of Minos, a Cretan princess. Athens had long suffered under her father's rule, and bringing her home as his bride would not be a symbol of peace, it would be a wound reopened. You will be safe here, he said, his voice tight. The gods will watch over you. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, Theseus, please. But he stepped back. And then he turned away. The walk back to the ship was the longest journey he had ever made. He did not look back. He could not. The moment he set foot on the deck, he gave the order to sail. As the island of Naxos faded behind them, Theseus stood at the bow, staring into the endless horizon. The weight in his chest did not lift. And yet, fate was not done with Ariadne. The gods had been watching, and on that island, she was not truly alone. Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, had seen her sorrow. He would come to her, offering not abandonment, but devotion. Where Theseus had left, Dionysus would stay. He would make her his queen, placing a crown of stars upon her brow, lifting her from heartbreak into divinity. But Theseus did not know this. He only knew the road ahead, the sea stretching toward Athens. His people awaited him, the promise of home pulling him forward. Yet even as he neared his homeland, fate had one last cruelty to play. He had told his father, King Aegeus, that if he returned victorious, he would raise white sails upon his ship. But lost in grief, lost in thought, he forgot. And as the black sails appeared on the horizon, Aegeus, believing his son dead, cast himself into the sea. The waves swallowed him, and the waters bore his name ever after, the Aegean Sea. When Theseus finally stepped onto Athenian soil, there was no father to greet him. Only a throne left empty. Victory had come at a cost. He had slain the Minotaur, escaped the labyrinth, freed his people. But in the end, he had lost just as much as he had won. And so, as he ascended the throne of Athens, Theseus carried with him not only the crown of a king, but the weight of the choices that had shaped his fate. For even the greatest of heroes cannot escape the price of their own destiny. That's the story of Theseus, Minotaur, and destiny. Hopefully this story can help you sleep. Good night.